I just got back from LA where I tested Path of Exile 2's couch co-op and console event. So this was played on a PlayStation with my buddy who is from Australia, flew out to play the game. Now I have much more experience with Path of Exile than he does, so I thought it would be kind of interesting to see how someone who's newer into Path of Exile and someone who's played for a few leagues are able to interact the game together while playing co-op. So the first thing we did was make our characters. We decided we're going to play the same character. Monk was in this playtest, which was not in the previous one. We both thought it looked like a fun class, so we decided let's play the same class Monk so that way we can see what trading gear and interacting with if you're playing the same thing looks like. Now, one of the first things you're going to notice when we start playing the game is that you are on the same screen. So there is no split horizontal, no split vertical. You are on the same screen. If he walks farther away from me, the camera zooms out a little bit. The next thing you're going to notice is that the inventory, skill tree, skill progression, any of the menu activations happen separately from each other and does not interrupt the other person's gameplay. This was one of our primary feedbacks that we realized we really enjoyed because he was still learning some of the game, so he would spend some time reading, but it didn't make me feel like I was slowed down at all. In fact, as I continued to progress through the map, if he had to go use the restroom or something, the character actually got dragged along and moved from that side of the screen with me without him being there, so that way I could continue to play the game and progress. So there was some quality of life features that they've added to co-op that make me realize this is going to be a very good game if you're into this style of genre of game that you can play with a friend and not really feel like you're going to get interrupted or held back or any of that. You're actually going to be able to play it with a friend very seamlessly. When it came to gear drops, something that you're going to notice is that the gear will drop either for me or for him, but we can both pick it up after a few seconds. So when it falls, you can see we both got a skill gem there, and I am the orange character, he is the blue character, and there's going to be a little X in order to pick it up, and the little orange X means that is for me to pick up, and the little blue X means that is for him to pick up. Here's a great example of a time in which having the menus be able to be independent are actually very enjoyable. When you're going through your skills or your skill tree and you want to be able to learn about your character, the other person can do it at the same time, so that way you're not really wasting any of your time. And things like bosses, mobs, etc., they actually do increase the health of these. They don't increase the damage of those monsters, so they're not like one-shotting you because it's, they're busted skeleton or anything like that. But they do increase the amount of HP in relation to how many players you are playing with, so that way you're not just overpowered because you have two of you. You're going to know this as we kill the boss here. This is an example of the loot being dropped independent, so I can pick up some, he can pick up some, and you can see that with the color there associated with the X. Now we're doing a quest here, the sort of beginning quest, and you're going to notice the interaction. Either of us could talk to the person. Each of us needs to talk to the person in order to be able to actually get your reward. So I'll talk to him, get my reward. You can see the blue icon over this screen is for him still. I thought, oh, do I need to talk to him still? Because I still saw the icon. But it was orange for me, blue for him. Once he talked to the character, he would get his reward as well. However, a lot of times, and there you can see he's picking up his skill gem. A lot of times what would happen is if we were talking to somebody and picking up a quest, it would pick it up for both of us. So there's some quality of life where we don't always both need to do the exact same dialogue option. Here's another great example. We both had a skill gem. We're trying to pick which skill we wanted to go with. I end up going with the Frozen Locust. He ends up going with the Tempest Bell. I'm going to talk about the Tempest Bell for a moment because I think it's a good example of a couch co-op being really enjoyable. The bell is basically an ability that when you drop it, the other players and yourself can hit the bell, creating an AoE effect. And also this is a good example of the rebinding of your skills. You have your controller here, and you can hold a tab in order. It's sort of like holding shift to open up another menu of buttons, so that way you can reuse as many buttons on your controller as possible. But back to the bell. So the bell will drop, and your other people within the party are very easily able to hit the bell and create sort of an AoE effect that drags the damage around in a circle. And there were some players that figured out a combination with this where like they had a ranger that was dropping poison pods they would hit the poison pods, which would create AoEs around it. And then the bell would transfer that damage, which would ramp it even more, for instance. So there are combinations that make you feel like you're interacting with your co-op partner as opposed to you're just blasting through and killing monsters together. You actually can set up combos together, which is something that I found very intriguing about the game. Here's an example of a boss fight we're doing in the beginning. Path of Exile 2 has these additional bosses that you can fight that are not required, but that might also give you a reward. So this one gave us the Head of Winterwolf. We both received that, plus some loot for each of us. And that Head of Winterwolf, when you consume it, gives you a bonus 10% permanent code resistance. So there are some additional units that you're going to want to slay in order to get a bonus that are not required around the world. The interesting part about the world is I was asking them, it seems like such a focus on bossing and campaigning in Path of Exile 2. Are you worried at all about replayability, for instance, in the game, or making alts as you're normally in Path of Exile forced to play the campaign again? And so how they're actually solving this solution is they're making it where the map itself varies, not just the instances that you're in on the map, but the map itself when you open up the map. So, and where you go for the quests will remain the same, but where these quests map positions are located will be different, meaning that normally in Path of Exile 1, the map stays static and you always know you have to go left because to the left is the next quest, etc., to go to the next area. In Path of Exile 2, this can actually change so that you're not actually going to have the exact same playthrough every time you play the campaign in the various different leagues. Overall, I was extremely impressed with the fluidness of being able to have the inventory system up at the same time, the skills at the same time. In my opinion, Path of Exile 2 is going to hit a much wider demographic because of how enjoyable it actually is to play with a partner. I thought I was going to feel slowed down or annoyed because I'm trying to blast through and I wanted to go as far into the game as I could. In fact, I'll jump ahead real quick and show you some of the later acts. But here we are later in the game. I think we were the second most progressed out of everyone there that was testing. And we were playing just fine. He was newer to the game. He was able to keep up because Path of Exile 2 has recommended features. So when you're playing again, be like, oh, you're playing a lightning skill. How about adding a support gem that does added lightning damage? So there's not really like hand-holding in the game, but I would say a better way of describing what is recommended for your character. And you might think, okay, well, what makes Path of Exile 1 so exciting is the ability to do anything in the game. That still exists. You can actually have a monk, and from the start, you can craft with your skill gems to drop, and that's how you get skill gems. Now you drop and you cut these uncut gems into skill gems. You can actually cut that into a mage ability and then put it onto your monk. You're not really stuck with whatever class you pick. So that part of Path of Exile still exists, but it is significantly improved in terms of accessibility for people that haven't played the game, which I think is a correct decision to make. This game is going to be free. It's going to be on consoles. It has cross-play, cross-progression, and because the co-op is so smooth and enjoyable and just flat-out fun, to be honest with you, that I do think a lot of people that are not familiar with Path of Exile, people that are just looking for a game to play with their buddy, their roommate, their girlfriend, whatever, and just hand someone the controller, they're going to end up playing this game. And they knew that. You can tell they know that. And see, there's an example of the map there. So they actually knew that, and they made the experience in getting into Path of Exile significantly easier, in my opinion, than in Path of Exile 1. So I don't think you need to play Path of Exile 1 to actually play Path of Exile 2. The way I describe it is the skill ceiling and knowledge ceiling is still very high, and all of the mechanics and stuff that you might be familiar with Path of Exile, they exist. But now the floor of the game in terms of knowledge required to even play the game and progress has been raised. You don't have to go into the game with 2,000 hours of Path of Exile 1 in order to play the game. This is now a game that if you enjoyed like Diablo 3 co-op or something like that, you're going to be able to play the game, do just fine. You can see I died there. One of the cool parts that they told me they did about the campaign was because there is multiple quests, like we're in Act 2 here, for instance, there's quests all over the map and you can choose in which order to actually do them. If you go and do one of the quests, the next area actually levels up. So that way the progression is allowed by you to have a varied experience. It's not necessarily 100% linear in the campaign every time, and you'll still have that difficulty. So you don't just skip ahead to one area, you get way beyond level, then you go back to the wrong area that you should have done first, and now suddenly you're one-shotting everything. They actually ramp the difficulty with you as you're continuing through the game. Also, I noticed that a lot of the things that normally annoy me about games, they've solved in this one. So this is actually an escort quest. This character wants to go with you somewhere, but she follows you as opposed to you having to follow her. She wants to fight the way to a gate, but she keeps up with you, actually does damage to the monsters as well. Not, significant damage. You're going to blast right through them, but it's not an annoying escort quest. So we were having a really good time exploring, and all throughout the map, as you're sort of exploring, there's tons and tons of bosses that you will just stumble upon that either give you rewards or require for your missions. Here's one right here, the sand pit. We were here in the sand pit, and all of a sudden this snake dude pops up, and all right, now it's time to fight a snake boss, I suppose. One thing I noticed that I think they're going to tweak, I asked him about this, and he said there's some balancing still to be done on this, is the stagger bar is that smaller bar under the health bar. And you can see with 2 players, this stagger bar actually starts ramping very quickly, and you can knock the person, sort of CC them. And we weren't really spec'd into stagger or stun or any of that type of stuff. We were just sort of playing the game normally, but there was a significant amount of stagger that would happen on the bosses, pretty commonly. And because of this, the bosses did feel like some of them would be trivialized because we had that DPS plus stagger, and then he'd be staggered. Then by the time the stagger's done, he's like a third of the way dead. I think this boss is a good example of that, for instance. So I do believe that stagger is going to be something that will be tweaked before the launch of the actual game. However, there was feedback from the first playtest, and I want to say that this game is significantly improved from the first playtest. In the first one, there was feedback saying that, okay, well, potions, for instance, potions, or you're too thirsty for them, you're constantly interrupting your gameplay by having to go back, etc. And they realized that the punishment for death and having to get potions all the time was highly annoying and sort of ruining gameplay for people. So their solution to this was they added more checkpoints, which help refill the potions and make it where it's a little bit less punishing. And they changed the way potion acquisition works a little bit, basically gave it a little bit of a buff. And I know this myself, not feeling thirsty for potions this time, but still having to worry about using too many of them too quickly. So it seems like the feedback is actually getting used and executed upon fairly quickly. The last playtest was not that long ago. It was just a few months ago. Something else I want to mention is that the environments and monsters are varied. So as you're playing through the campaign, you don't really feel like you're having the same fight over and over and over again, the same experience over and over and over again. You're actually getting a variety of lighting. Like this, I think, is a good example of really cool lighting with the fire there, with the torches. You're getting a variety of lighting, a variety of actual environments, a variety of monsters in terms of monster typing and what they look like, but also the abilities in which they use. So I did feel like I was pushing through a world and running into other fights as opposed to repeating the same fight just in different theme parks, for instance. This is another really good example of how the couch co-op is so smooth, because it's like, hey, I need a second to open my inventory. Then he at the same time is like, okay, cool, I got something I can do. He would open it up, and then he would work on a skill tree or something fairly quickly here. And we found ourselves, as the game was going on, more and more kept nudging each other like, man, this is really smooth. And you can see I'm starting to move there, like I'm going to pick up some gear and kind of check stuff out while he finishes up his inventory. And then he's done, he starts showing up. One of the feedback points I did have was that movement speed, like I got movement speed boots fairly early, so I was blasting ahead of him quite often, and he would have to catch up with me. This is something where I don't know how they're going to be able to fix this solution, or if it even really needs a solution. He probably just needs some movement speed as well, but it is something I noticed where I did feel like I was very commonly ahead of him just because of how much faster my character actually was. Here's another cool example of a boss fight. This guy was just somebody we stumbled upon while playing the game, and he is like a sentinel that just walks throughout the map, constantly summons minions and explodes, so you got to be careful of the explosion. And he just kind of walks back and forth, and you got to try to defeat him, but mostly he's just summoning ads to like run up on you, and there's lots of explosions going on, etc. So you're trying to chase him down while also deal with all the ads that are going, but not getting too close because he'll blow up on you. So the variety in terms of boss fights that you are going to experience, and I'll show you some of the other ones later here in a moment, but the variety of boss fights, like none of the 2 bosses felt the same at all. They all felt like they were doing their own thing uniquely. Here's another boss fight for you, the Forsaken Sun. So this guy, it was the boss right after the one I just showed you, and he is sort of a flame 2 or 4-handed. I'm not really sure. He's got a lot of arms there. He's like a General Grievous, okay? And so he would be a melee fight. Now, we were starting to ramp our DPS at this point, and this is when I realized, like, your build can actually get pretty strong, because we were shredding his HP bar, you can see there. But he's got some pretty cool moves to do some damage. I almost got one shot there. There's this sort of spinning effect, and this was, again, another type of boss that was just very different from any of the ones that we had experienced previously. There's a stagger. I do think they're going to balance the staggers, because the staggers just feel really strong to me, though I do like that. I feel like I'm building up for something. Like I'm like, okay, let's go push. He's about to be staggered. We would say that multiple times where it's like, okay, Rady is going to be staggered. Okay, now go. And then we would like drop all of our cooldowns, etc. So I do like that. I just think there's probably, and here's another stagger, So I feel like it does make the bosses they're so cool. It's the best part of the game that the stagger sometimes can make the bosses feel like they're not as threatening as maybe they should be, for instance. But you can see the visuals of these boss fights are like pretty awesome. And there's me doing some 360 no scopes. Overall, I want to say this sort of as we get to the conclusion here. The couch co-op is almost flawless. It is very seamless. It is very enjoyable. It has a very low barrier to entry. It is not aggravating to play with somebody at all. I would argue I had a much more enjoyable time in co-op than I did in single player. In some feedback points, I will say that I do wish that it was a little bit easier to tell which player you are. Granted, we're both playing Monk, but you see we can get a lot of stuff on the screen here. It can be kind of difficult to tell where you actually are on the map, especially when you're the same color as the floor, for instance. You're not really seeing that blue and orange circle very easily on your character. But the thought process that they put into couch co-op is obvious. It seems obvious to me that what they're attempting to do is reach into a much wider demographic. And they thought we have to, in order to do that, we have to make the game more explainable to people that haven't played the game before. We have to have them be able to play with their friends. They have to not get aggravated by a difference in level of knowledge of the game. And we have to have quality of life that you're not slowly getting annoyed by little, oh, I got to talk to this guy 13 times now. He's got to talk to him. Like, they cut out a lot of what, in my opinion, is just bullshit about couch co-op with these types of games. And they just made it smooth. A good example of this is you literally in town can just hit a button that just moves the item from your inventory to your friend. You can just trade it across, because why would you need to open the trade menu? You guys are playing co-op. It's obvious who you're trying to trade it with. You just hit button, the item is now in the other person's inventory. You share gold. So that way you can both pool gold in order to sell items and share resources that way. If I get a skill gem and I want him to be able to cut that uncut skill gem into something, I can just give him my skill gem. There is a significant amount of thought process in the game related to making sure that when I play with my buddy, that it is going to be a smooth, enjoyable experience, and I won't feel aggravated as a player who's like, I really want to progress, but I also want to play with a friend. That aggravation does not exist. The revives are fair. It takes time, but you can also get interrupted. There's a good example of like trying to revive, for instance. So I think revival is a pretty standard mechanic in this game. They don't really change it too much from other games with revive type of mechanics. But overall, because it's going to be free on console, because it's smooth couch co-op gameplay, because in these games you don't really see this style too much. Like, couch co-op is almost a dead meme in 2024. There's some games that still come out with it, but not as many as you would really hope. And also the difficulty of the game is difficult enough that playing with a friend actually feels pretty good. You're like, I could actually use your help when going through the campaign, for instance. Boss fights are enjoyable. Honestly, this is not a sponsored video. I didn't get paid $1 to fly out there and test it. I didn't get paid $1 to make a video. They didn't even ask me to make a video. They just said, hey, come test the game and give us feedback, which I did. And this, I think, is going to be probably my highest recommended game for couch co-op once it's out, just because of how it was exceptionally enjoyable, in my own personal opinion. It's going to, in my opinion, be the best in the ARPG genre in terms of couch co-op and playing with a buddy. And the fact that they're putting it on console with cross progression, cross play, very smooth drop in, drop out style of gameplay. I was impressed with how well it actually does play. So there'll be a lot of other Path of Exile 2 videos talking more about gameplay mechanics and breakdowns, etc. This is sort of first impressions. So you can go ahead and hit subscribe if you would like to see more videos related to this. I'll have footage of boss fights, etc. That's about it. Very much enjoyed the game. I very much think you will if you are the type of person that wants to play with a friend. That's about it. Thanks for watching.